Royce Lewis comes through in the clutch, Byron Buxton leaves the game, and the Twins are committed to buying at the trade deadline. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is always cold, the Twins talk is always hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins opening their series against the Royals with a walk-off win. Here's how it happened. Taj Bradley was on one from the very beginning. The Twins' ace had no trouble working through the first 5 innings of the game, holding the Royals to just 1 hit. Meanwhile, he got some help on the offensive side finally when Cody Clemens hit a double and was driven in by a Josh Bell dribbler up the middle. However, Bradley began to labor a bit in the 6th, walking Josh Rojas and letting Lane Thomas on with the single. Then with runners at the corners, the Royals go with the Little League double steal play that the Twins are unable to hold off as Rojas swipes home on the throw down to second to tie the game, and then a soft pop-up off the bat of Salvador Perez somehow finds grass to bring in Thomas and put the Royals on top. Minnesota had plenty of opportunities after that and before that to put more than one measly run on the board, but they continued to hit into double play after double play. 5 to be exact. That's the most by any team so far this season. However, they were finally able to break through in the 9th. Victor Caratini leading off with a single, then Brooks Lee draws a 1-out walk before Royce Lewis hits a towering fly ball that scrapes the right center field wall with 2 outs, and both runners come in to score on a walk-off triple that gives Minnesota a 3-2 win. The Twins improved to 54-54. They're in 3rd place in the AL Central, just 2 games back of first place Chicago, and they're only a half game behind Cleveland for the final AL wildcard spot. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. We are a part of the Grey Duck Sports Network, where we talk Minnesota sports and the NFL. You can find us on Twitter at Grey Duck Sports, and then YouTube as well at the same handle at Grey Duck Sports. And then we are on TikTok at Grey.Duck.Sports. There you can find clips from our shows, analysis of the day's news and games, as well as different series that we're working on for your enjoyment, again, at the Grey Duck Sports Network. Well, what a game that was. Talk about going from the pits of despair in a game where it seemed like you probably should have won, with all of the opportunities that the Twins had against Seth Lugo, with some of the bad luck that the Twins had with, as Derek Shelton put it after the game, the Mickey Mouse way that the Royals scored both of their runs in the 6th inning. It kind of just seemed like it wasn't going to be the Twins' night, and you have that over the course of the baseball season, but we've been at a point now where the Twins always seem to claw right back up to 500, and then they have a game like this that prevents them from finally reaching that 500 plateau, and then they lose 3 of 4, and they have to begin a new climb the following week. Today, that doesn't happen. Today, the club shows its resiliency, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show, about how this team has kind of taken on the personality of the person who manages it. But how about Royce Lewis? Coming in cold off the bench. Obviously, he didn't come in cold for his walk-off hit, but he comes in the 8th inning, draws a walk, has a good at-bat there, and then has a great at-bat to bring in the game-winning runs, the game-tying and the game-winning runs, with runners on first and second. Sky-high fly ball, right center field, almost gets out for an even more fun moment, but he'll take the RBI walk-off triple any day of the week, no doubt. And that was the kind of at-bat, and that was the kind of hit that gives me some more confidence that this Royce Lewis is back, and he is here to stay. Because what we've seen from Royce Lewis in the past couple of years, even when he's been in his hotter moments during that time, it's been a failure to drive the ball to all parts of the ballpark and always pulling it down the third base line, and that gets you in trouble on pitches that are outside of the zone because you're not going to be able to get as much power behind them as a right-handed hitter on that outside portion. You're pulling them, you're probably more often than not then going to put them on the ground, and it's going to lead to a ground out or a double play, and you're not going to be maximizing what you can do with the bat. And I saw, and Justin Morneau saw, Royce Lewis make an intentional decision with how he was going to go up against Alex Lang in that final at-bat. And we saw it from the very first pitch. It was a cutter that was on the outside. It didn't hit the zone. It was in a couple inches off of the plate, and Royce Lewis offered at it and went around per the first base umpire to go behind in the count 0-1. But on that cutter, you could see, and on that swing, I should say, at the cutter, you can see Royce Lewis's swing path, what he was thinking of doing with the baseball. And that made my ears perk up because it looked like he was going to wait back on it and just take the pitch the other way and drive it, which is not something we've seen. We see Royce Lewis lunge after pitch after pitch after pitch. The ones that are in the zone, the ones are outside of the zone, and to his credit, he has great bat control, great contact ability. But again, those sorts of hits don't always are not always the optimal way to get on base or the optimal way to finish off your plate appearances. You have to take pitches to all parts of the field when they're offered in other parts of the zone that are suboptimal for pulling the baseball. And that is what Royce Lewis did, or was trying to do, with that first pitch on the cutter on the outside. He didn't offer it all the way, but he kept that in the back of his mind that he was going to get that cutter again, and maybe this time it would come a little bit more on the plate and he would be able to drive it. So he watches a ball go down low and lays off of it, spits on that pitch, gets the cutter on the third pitch, the same one that he saw. This one, again, hangs on the plate. He takes the same swing path that he checked swinged with just a moment earlier and takes it to right center. And that's not something we would see with Royce Lewis over the 2024, 2025, and early on in this 2026 season when he's been at his worst. Even in his best moments during that rough, long 2.5-year stretch, during those good moments that were few and far between, it was always him pulling the baseball. And even when he got back up to the major league level this year after spending some time to reset in St. Paul, all of his hits, all of his power was coming from the pull side, but not today. So I am hoping that that is more trend than one-off, because if Royce Lewis can keep that swing path and have that same sort of approach that he had against Alex Lang, then this Twins team has gotten its superstar first overall pick back, I think. So I am excited to see what Royce Lewis does, how he builds off that momentum and continues to work on his approach at the plate, because, I mean, he is a guy that we've seen when he hits his potential back in 2023 and before his injury in 2022, he is a top player, or has the potential to be a top player in all of baseball. So good job by Royce Lewis. Good job by this Minnesota Twins team. And of course, a big round of applause goes to the starting pitcher that we got at last year's trade deadline, Taj Bradley. How about that? Another great game from Taj Bradley, who really seems to have found a way to limit his walks. I don't know if he's ever going to be a guy that can be an under 2 walks per 9 inning, like immaculate control sort of pitcher, but if he can stay in that 3 walks per 9, in between 3 and 4 walks per 9, it's not like the best control, but it's giving you functional control. And today, Taj Bradley threw 56 of his 102 pitches in the zone, 46 out of the zone, and batters swung at 49 of them. They whiffed on just under a third of those pitches. Taj Bradley was keeping Royals hitters off balance all game long, so much so that the only runs that the Royals were able to manufacture in this game came on a walk and then a single and then a double steal. So a double steal brings in the first run, and then a lazy pop-up that, had the outfield been playing it just a little bit differently by Salvador Perez, that finds the grass with one hop on just a little bloop, scores the other run. Taj Bradley was nearly unhittable, to the fact where even though he gave up a hit earlier in the game, it almost seemed like he was working on a no-hitter. And when they panned him in the clubhouse, he was loose and joking with the guys. And Corey Provis was talking about the sort of aura that he has around him when he's on the mound, and the confidence that he has, especially, and how it grows throughout the start when he begins to feel that his stuff is dominant like it was tonight. The way he hops off the mound after a strikeout and kind of just enjoys all of that. That is Taj Bradley that the Twins traded for when they gave away Griffin Jax at the trade deadline last year, and that trade is looking like a 100% Twins win at this very moment. He gets the no decision, but he's 9-4 this year, now with a 3.63 ERA. He had 10 strikeouts, just 3 walks, and 3 hits in this game, and time after time, whereas during his Rays stints, you would see glimpses of this, but it would be interspersed with a lot of different bad starts or a lot of different 5-inning starts where he walked 5 guys, struck out 6, and gave up 4 runs. Something along the tune of that. That had been the norm with Taj Bradley, and now he's kind of flipped the table on that, where most of his starts now, his control is still there, and he had a couple of starts, especially after coming back from his injury that he missed a couple of weeks in the middle or the early parts of the season. He had a brief couple of starts where he was not at his best and where he was having trouble locating the zone and commanding his split finger fastball, but he seems to have gotten that back, and now it is those rough moments that are spaced out sparsely in between a whole lot of electrifying moments. And that gives you faith that if the Minnesota Twins make the postseason, they've got a solid 1-2 punch at the top of their rotation. They can win a wild card series on the backs of their pitching alone with Joe Ryan and Taj Bradley starting games 1 and game 2. I am confident that Taj Bradley now has shown me enough consistency with that split finger fastball this year, which is his best pitch, and now an ability to better command his fastball in the strike zone and throw it for strikes and challenge hitters more often with it. That has given me a lot more confidence that, much like this version of Royce Lewis hopefully is here to stay, like I mentioned earlier, this version of Taj Bradley is also here to stay for the long haul. Now, maybe this is just some elongated period of goodness that is going to be, again, sparsely separated by a lot of periods of darkness for Taj Bradley, but I just don't see it going in that direction with what he's been able to do since coming over to the Minnesota Twins, since last year spending time in St. Paul to refine that split finger, finding it then and during the offseason, and now employing his whole arsenal of pitches. His 4 pitches that he uses with that curveball and the cutter to go off of the fastball and splitter. When he mixes all those pitches as well as he did tonight, it's going to keep hitters off balance, and he kept everything at the same release point. So get ready for some potential Taj Bradley in postseason baseball this year. It could be a fun one if the Twins are able to get, again, into the playoffs. If they are going to get to the playoffs, you'd assume they would need the help of one Byron Buxton, who left today's game with a hip injury after his second at-bat running down the first base line. After the game, Derek Shelton told reporters that Buxton had his hip impingement flare up. He's going to be day-to-day. And that's not really surprising. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but when you just do a simple Google search for hip impingement injury and how long it takes to recover, if you want to fully recover, it says you can be functional with the hip impingement, still not, all the way 100% recovered. But the actual recovery is 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, something around those lines of very, very light activity. So he's not going to be fully healed from this hip impingement injury until this offseason. It's going to be something that, by its nature, just bothers him the rest of the year, and we're going to have times where he has to be out of the lineup and times where he might exit the game, and hopefully it doesn't, you just hope that it doesn't cascade into a bigger hip impingement injury, in which case that he could potentially need surgery at that point and be out 6 to 9 months to recover from that. But I'm not too concerned, and I'm not feeding back into this injury-prone narrative. Any hitter that has the hip impingement during the season is going to have that flare up after they return from the initial recovery stage, because that is the nature of that injury. Day to day, we'll see when he comes back, if he comes back during this homestand or if he comes back when the Twins go to Seattle. Again, I don't expect it to be anything super serious, and neither do the Minnesota Twins, at least according to what Derek Shelton said with his post-game comments immediately following Minnesota's 3-2 win. Obviously, it's always great to have Byron Buxton in your lineup as the superstar hitter that he has really become at the major league level. Talking about Derek Shelton and his post-game press conference, time and time again, after these sorts of games that the Twins have won, he has mentioned this team's resiliency and this team's never give up an at-bat sort of attitude. And today he mentioned he had a certain fire about him. He spoke bluntly about how the Royals got their runs. He spoke bluntly about it being frustrating that the Twins were outplaying Kansas City throughout the course of this game, but it wasn't something that he was going to get too caught up in. And he was going to keep the team's vision and their eye on the prize and just continue to fight, continue to take good at-bats, and things will fall your way more often than not. And this is a team that has really taken on the personality, the resilient personality of its manager, Derek Shelton. Just think about what Derek Shelton had to endure as the Pittsburgh Pirates manager over the last 5 seasons. It was no help from ownership, even less help than he gets from the Minnesota Twins ownership. That was the case in Pittsburgh. No help from the players that are supposed to be developing in the minor leagues level. Henry Davis never really became what they thought he would become. O'Neal Cruz did, but Ke'Bryan Hayes never really became what they thought he was going to become. The guys in charge of development in the minor leagues weren't doing their job, so he was left with a lot of pieces to try and paste together and still make the Pirates somewhat respectable. I remember, I think it was the 2023 or 2024 season at the beginning of the year, they had a pretty decent lead in the NL Central before things started falling off. And you see in 2025, Derek Shelton get fired. And what does he do? Does he take, the rest of the year off and rest on his laurels, lick his wounds, as it were? No, he decides, okay, I'm going to join a radio show. And immediately following the season, is he going to take a year off and kind of continue that radio show? No, he's going to get back up and get back into a dugout. Whether that would be at a minor league stadium if the Twins hadn't been come calling, or somewhere else, he wanted to be back in the game. And he immediately pulled himself back off the mat after getting hit, after facing frustration after frustration after frustration in Pittsburgh, and became the manager of this Minnesota Twins team. And now this team, which is filled a lot by players who have been on this squad for years in the past and hadn't shown the resiliency that they are right now, it is filled with those players, and the team now is showing that resiliency. And I think that is kind of what you get with your manager. We're at a point in the baseball world where essentially, if you were just talking about pure moves that are the best at predicting and best at optimizing your positive outcomes, you could have a computer do that for you. Right now, it is about leading players. It is about keeping the team together, and with your personality, having the team feed off of you. And I think this team fed off of Rocco Baldelli in the good times and the bad times, and I think right now this team is mirroring the personality of Derek Shelton. Rocco Baldelli, he was a very chill, laid-back manager, and that worked for the 2019 Minnesota Twins, who were able to hit home runs and who had that same sort of confidence. But then when you have that chill, sort of laid-back demeanor and you're not having the same success, well, now you're not necessarily pressing yourself to get better. You're not necessarily pressing yourself to take every single at-bat because everything's going to be all good. And now that sort of laid backness kind of comes off as undeserved overconfidence. And that's not necessarily what it was, but I think that is what ultimately plagued the end of the Rocco Baldelli era in Minnesota, is that teams take on the persona of their managers. Baldelli was laid back, and now Derek Shelton is the epitome of resiliency. So that is something to keep in mind as this team continues. There haven't been games, even in some blowouts, where the Twins have given up at bats lightly. So it has been fun to see a team that never has that quit in them, where I think we saw that a lot, especially at the end of the 2025 season, times in the 2022 season, especially in the 2021 season after the trade deadline there, and even in September during the 2024 season. It seemed like the team it became a self-fulfilling prophecy that they were going to fall out of playoff contention in all of those years. Another thing that's going to help the Minnesota Twins get into playoff contention is the fact that the trade deadline is coming up in less than a week. We had a show earlier. You can find it on this podcast feed. It is the most recent show outside of this one, where we talked about my plans for the Twins at the trade deadline. And first step, Minnesota Twins agree that at a fundamental basis with me and with us, that this team needs to be buyers at the trade deadline. Jeremy Zoll spoke to reporters before the series began today, and he talked about very candidly how this team is going to approach this trade deadline. It seems like they are committed. When you say we're going to be buyers, you have essentially pot committed to being buyers. And that is what Jeremy Zoll did with the media today. So if they walk back that promise, there is a whole lot more hellfire that they will catch on the back end if they decide to sell or just stand pat and not get anything done. And obviously, Zoll mentioned the bullpen being a top priority to find fresh, effective arms to solidify the bullpen. And also mentioned that getting a starting pitcher could also be a back-end way of solidifying the bullpen, because it will push a young starter into a relief pitcher role, and he should have some success in that role, and be able to fill in for take the place of a relief pitcher who would be rather inadequate. So he's not crossing off the idea of acquiring starting pitchers to bolster the depth of this rotation and also push down some good starters into the bullpen, so that they can be effective there and come in for us in crucial situations during the last 2 months. He also mentioned that the Twins were looking for out-of-the-box ways, and other more curious, maybe unexpected pieces to add. I'm not sure necessarily what he meant by that, but that could be fun. Kind of guess what's behind door number 3. And it's nice to finally be a part of a Twins, being a fan of a Twins team that's going to buy at the deadline. We had that in 2022, and it did backfire on Minnesota. But 2023 going with hardly anything at the deadline, 2024 going with hardly anything at the deadline, and then 2025 blowing up the team at the deadline has really kind of, I think, hardened us to turned us away from this trade deadline as a time of, a Christmas in July, and turned it into a shell-shocked soldier coming back from World War I. That's what it has turned us into as Minnesota Twins fans within that metaphor. So I'm glad that the Minnesota Twins have committed a week out in advance to bolstering their team, bolstering their bullpen, and perhaps even bolstering their starting rotation. And one other thing that he said is that obviously they're probably not going to touch their top prospects, and nor should they. But he did say that Minnesota and the organization has faith in Walker Jenkins, in Kalen Culpepper, to come up and be a part of a playoff push. So if Minnesota needs to trade players from its current active roster that are currently holding up a space for, say, Walker Jenkins or Kalen Culpepper or Henry Mendez or Emmanuel Rodriguez, if those guys are taking up the place, or taking a place and preventing and blocking a young prospect from coming up, if Zoll can get a better return for a current everyday major leaguer, that obviously not Byron Buxton, but a current everyday major leaguer, he's going to take that path because he has faith that Walker Jenkins and Kalen Culpepper and all of those guys can come up and can contribute right away if they become unblocked at those positions. So he didn't rule out trading away players on the major league roster that are currently on the 26-man roster right now today. Someone that just played into last night's game is not completely off the table, but that doesn't mean that they're selling. He also didn't full out say that the Twins weren't going to trade Ryan Jeffers, but I feel pretty confident after listening and reading those post-game, or pre-game, I should say, quotes that Minnesota is not going to give away their catcher at the deadline this year. And if they have to let him walk, they let him walk. They'll try to re-sign him, obviously, during these next 2 months and after the season, in that window that they have to exclusively negotiate with their own players before the league year ends. Just some quick news to look at. Roster move was made before today's game. Cole Sands was sent to the injured list as he is dealing with a right elbow strain. Cole Sands has been an effective reliever for Minnesota at times. 2024 had a really good season. 2025, a little bit more mercurial. And then 2026, it's mostly been injury. And when he did come in to pitch over the weekend, he promptly hit a batter and then gave up a 3-run home run that got the Athletics a little bit closer in that game. It seems like now that possibly could have been because the injury was re-aggravated at some point during that game or during his rehab process or in the time since. So he is on the IL with the right elbow strain. When you go on the IL twice in the same season with an elbow strain, typically can be a precursor to Tommy John. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say that definitively, but I'm not sure if we're going to see Cole Sands back with the team throughout the rest of the year. So if you were depending on him to be a bullpen arm for Minnesota down the stretch, well, then a need in the bullpen just became a little bit bigger and a little bit more urgent to fill. So the Twins at the trade deadline are certainly going to address that. Minnesota did bring up Jack Anderson, who has kind of been up and down. Less than a week ago, he was acquired by the Twins. He was put on the active roster right away for Wusa Go, and then sent down before the weekend series against the Athletics, and then brought back up now for this injury to Cole Sands. And in this week of moving between Minneapolis and St. Paul and trying to find an apartment in which one, do I want to stay in Falcon Heights, or do I want to, go to Bloomington, or do I want to go over to like Woodbury or something, because I don't know exactly where I'm going to be in this time of uncertainty in these last 6 days. Jack Anderson has shown the resiliency of this Minnesota Twins team and has already taken on the persona of his manager by saving a game and then tonight getting the win out of the bullpen by tossing a scoreless inning against the Kansas City Royals. So Jack Anderson has been effective. I don't know how much faith I have in him, going down the stretch as a major arm in this bullpen, but so far so good for Jack Anderson, all things considered. Up next for the Minnesota Twins, they are going to continue their series. They'll go for a series win against the Kansas City Royals with their game this evening. It'll be old friend Randy Dobnak coming onto the mound for the Kansas City Royals. Yes, you heard that right. The former Uber driver himself is going to get the ball against the Minnesota Twins. Currently this season, he hasn't pitched much, but no wins, no losses, in a 1.42 ERA and just 10 strikeouts. Minnesota, meanwhile, is going to go with Joe Ryan, their ace, to try and take home this, or to win another series. Ryan this year is 6-6 with a 3.38 ERA and 131 strikeouts, and obviously also just played in his second consecutive All-Star game. So I'm expecting the Twins to win that one. I'm not sure if Randy Dobnak, since 2021, has ever won a game at the major league level. But now that I say that, I might have to end up eating my words if he comes through and throws a good start against Minnesota. But whatever the case is, we will recap that one back here tomorrow night. And for now, that is the last call on Twins Talk this evening. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins.